disposal facility in their community. And I think they know that, and the government knows that. So at the back end of March this year, the last vote to be held in Parliament before the election in May, and the vote was passed by 277 votes to 33, and that vote was to remove all local authority participation in the decision-making process of where nuclear waste is going to be buried in this country. And this is, funnily enough, very similar, of course, to what's happened with fracking last Friday in Lancashire. We'll talk about that again in a second. So, and by the way, what we also know now is that a lot of the MPs who voted in favour of this motion didn't even know what they were voting for. Parliament was over, it was finished, they were all going off to start their campaigning. They were in the bar partying and the division bell rang. And I know this because we've heard this from 2 or 3 MPs now. And the division bell rang, and so they responded to the division bell, go upstairs, and the whip says, to the left, or to the right, whatever. But, I mean, there was no anti-whip. So basically it was primarily just going through the division gates.
Did they not know what they were going to do?
No. No. Yes, they are. Yeah, yeah. So, yes, sir. Say again?
Being a bit of a devil's advocate, just saying something. We were talking about some of the papers saying that they're taking the right time to put big mass fires on the basis that the glass would be stronger or stronger quality for steel. And what would be the problem, because it would be so far down, there'd be no problem, you know.
Well, maybe there's not, but that's for the community to decide. That's for each community to decide.
Yeah, but this is what people say, that people who are for fracking.
Oh, hang on a second, we're not talking about the...
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what happens here. You have to have a really good case back that all the alternatives can't be used. See what I mean?
Yeah, but let's stay with the nuclear waste element first and then, you know, come back. Because my observation... That my point here is that, you know, because they know that no community is going to buy into the proposition to have a nuclear waste disposal facility built beneath their community. They're looking at Plan B. And Plan B, and the research facility for this is at Sheffield University. Plan B is to use deep wells for toxic nuclear waste disposal. So call it a hunch. It's a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis that I've been talking about for over a year, and nobody wants to openly discuss it, and certainly they don't want to deny it. But what I have put forward is the hypothesis that one of the reasons that these companies are still motivated to drill these wells for the exploitation of unconventional gas, despite it not being a viable proposition in the current economy, is they're looking at the potential revenue stream that will come at some future point when they can lease out, sell, whatever, the deep well, the 10,000-foot well, as a repository for toxic nuclear waste. And if you want to see a bit more about the research, then just search for deep borehole disposal, Sheffield University, and I think the professor that's driving that is a guy called Fergus Ginn, and they're actually looking to do some trials in the US, but ultimately I think that that's what they're looking at some maybe a couple of decades down the road. Deep borehole disposal.
Just gotta get on.
I believe they have. I mean, Halliburton have had numerous patents, certainly for the last 30 years, of getting some of this waste disposed of in the wells. And I mean, what the industry gets away with in the US, I'd like to think it wouldn't get away with here. But what we're seeing is that, you know, the British government works on the basis of, hopefully nobody will notice what we're doing. You know, their attitude is, we want you to vote for us, and then just leave us alone. And what they're actually starting to realise is that, and primarily thanks to fracking in a big way, is that MPs are being scrutinised like never before. You know, people are actually starting to ask the questions and to educate themselves. So, going back to your area here, I mean, don't think for 1 minute that if iGas do get their bits in the ground, that it's only going to be half a dozen or a dozen wells spread across that area. That would be the start. And what they do is they work on the principle, obviously, of drilling a well as far away as they possibly can from the previous well, and then they come into the middle, and they keep coming into the middle until you end up with a situation like you got in Queensland and in pretty much every state in the US that has an unconventional gas play, which is North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Utah, Texas, Virginia, and Idaho. And the signature that this industry leaves behind is almost standard. And that's contamination of the water, the soil, the air, and the knock-on impact, particularly on agriculture, both arable and livestock, and then obviously onto the local population. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, Professor Robert Oswald wrote an open letter to David Cameron, which was published in the British press. And Professor Robert Oswald had done some research with a vet, Michel Bamberger, and they had been to a number of states in the US where this industry had got itself established. And they were researching the impact on farming communities. And the open letter basically was encouraging David Cameron not to rush ahead with this industry in a country that, as small as ours, as densely populated as ours, that was as reliant on its agriculture as we are, because his prognosis was that if this industry got a foothold, then it would destroy agriculture in the UK within a generation. Now, 2 years ago, the government claimed that, well, you know, this is all anecdotal. There's no scientific evidence to support this. That's not true today. That's not true. Scientific, peer-researched papers are being produced in the US and in Australia at a phenomenal rate of knots. And it's pretty easy to see who's the prime funder behind these papers, because you can pick up papers that claim there's no problems, and you can obviously pick up the papers that identify that there are, you know, very, very real and significant problems. A year ago, exactly a year ago, I was out in southern Queensland. It was my second visit to the gas fields. The previous time was 2 years prior. And in fact, it was when I was out there in 2012 and getting a tour of gas fields, and I won't say I was bragging, but I was making the observation that, you know, at least, thank God, we had a moratorium in the UK, because the moratorium had been put in place basically in the August of 2011, after it became evident that, you know, Quadrilla were responsible for the seismic movement there. So I said, well, at least we got a moratorium, and hopefully, you know, hopefully now people will do the research, and, you know, that moratorium will turn into an outright ban. How wrong could I be? Because literally, I came back from that trip, and literally within a week, David Cameron had lifted the moratorium and basically said, you know, we want to get fracking. So, well, here we are 3 years later, and we still have not had a well drilled and fracked. I think there is the distinct possibility that Rathlin Energy started to frack the well at West Newton in, what would that be, last year, yeah, about August of last year. And the moment they started to frack, they lost control of the well. Now, they are denying that they actually fracked, but a piece of video has recently come into the public domain, which may suggest that that's not strictly true. and actually putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, it looks like they pressurised the well. They thought they were going to be able to do the frack, but as soon as they pressurised the well, they lost control of the well, and they had to go through a very expensive intervention process. They had fire in the hole, fire in the well as well, and that ended with that well being completely shut down. So the track record in this country isn't that great so far. And yet, you know, we've still got a government that says, yeah, we're going to push ahead with this. So let me just pull up some pics here. Technology is just not working with us tonight. It's been my day, isn't it? Or not, as the case might be. There we go, sorry. Sorry, being male, I can't do two things at once, you know. Right, just a couple of things. This is Kerry Honeyrake, by the way. This is the MP that went over to Pennsylvania from North Yorkshire to investigate for himself, because he was hearing all of these stories, you know, about fracking.
What party is it?
Yes, North Yorkshire story. Well, he went over there and he came back from the trip to North Yorkshire and said, yeah, you know, it's really not a problem. He said, we're much better regulated in this country, but I'm still going to ask for an exclusion zone of 1 mile between any fracked well and any property that's lived in or used as a public building, like a school or whatever. 1 mile exclusion zone. Well, the only problem was he hadn't obviously checked the maps, because the well that is the problem in North Yorkshire is at a place called Kirby Misperton. And the well is literally 1 kilometre from the entrance of Flamingo Land, which is North Yorkshire's biggest tourist attraction. In fact, it gets more revenue into Yorkshire than the next 2 largest tourist attractions combined. And the entire village of Kirby Misperton is inside that 1 kilometre radius. So 1 week after making his statement that he wanted a 1 mile exclusion zone, guess what? He had a change of heart. Oh, yeah. And he's now basically said that he's not going to stand in the way of a new industry coming into Yorkshire. I mean, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, he's made himself irrelevant to the argument. I mean, this is he didn't like this when I posted this up.
I'm calling for 1 mile fracking exclusion zone. No, you have to check the other coverage.
No shit. You know, I mean, you know, what do they expect? I mean, these guys, you know, they're elected representatives, and basically, it's when you know it comes down to the nub, you find out who they truly represent. You know, in Manchester, during the Barton Moss campaign, Barbara Healy, to her credit, Barbara Keeley, the MP, she never wavered from her statement that she would resist any fracking in her constituency. And basically the industry and the government said, like we care what you think. You know, this is their attitude. And although, you know, it's really important that obviously we do try to resist this at every appropriate opportunity. So, you know, we resist when they're putting in the planning applications, you know, but ultimately what we are seeing is that we're just going through a charade. And of course that all came home to roost last Thursday evening, ironically, Friday was Lancashire Day, but on Thursday evening, the Department of Energy and Climate Change announced that although the appeal hearing that Quadrilla had called after Lancashire County Council rejected Quadrilla's applications to drill 2 wells at Rossiter and Preston New Road, that although the appeal hearing would still be chaired by a planning inspector who would write his report, instead of what would normally occur, which is the planning inspector making the final decision, the government has said, well, the planning inspector is going to give us the report and we're going to make the final decision. So you know what the outcome of that is going to be. You know. I'd like to think I'm wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. But unfortunately, I have a nasty feeling I'm not. Because this is, what we're seeing. We're also seeing in every council. I mean, I have attended more council meetings in the last 2.5 years than I care to think about. That's parish council meetings, town council meetings, county council meetings and district council meetings. And they go from literally the sublime to the ridiculous. The Rydale Council, which got a 5-year, or passed a motion for a 5-year fracking moratorium in Rydale, every parish council and every town council in North Yorkshire has voted for either a fracking ban or a 5-year moratorium. But of course the ultimate decision is with North Yorkshire County Council. So North Yorkshire County Council are certainly under some pressure, obviously because of the decisions that have been taken by the parish and town councils, but they're not required to necessarily stay with them. Okay, in no particular order. Here's the document that I was referring you to. This is the white paper that the British government published in July of 2014, implementing geological disposal. Okay, in that paper, it shows you where the nuclear waste is held today. And you don't even need to read the document, you can look at the pictures and see the graphic which spells out the 100-year agenda to turn this country into a toxic nuclear waste dump. So, ultimately, this is about educating communities. It's about encouraging communities to come to their own realisation of what is potentially going to be perpetrated upon them. And it's becoming very evident that it doesn't matter what the magnitude of the opposition, because in every community where this industry is trying to get a foothold, any poll shows that 80% plus of the people do not want it. And when it's imminent, it becomes 90% plus. In Pennsylvania, by the way, it's still 80-20, but there's a difference. Because in Pennsylvania, the landowner actually gets a 20% royalty. And in fact, some of the landowners right now are having to try to recover those royalties through the courts, because the industry, of course, is literally going into the toilet, because it can't be sustained at this level. So people are not getting their royalties. So companies like Cabot, who Steve talked about, and Chesapeake, they've not paid the royalties because basically they've needed the cash flow for themselves. And so people who let them onto their properties thinking that they were going to get a nice little income out of it have suddenly found that that is not the case. So the key element really is to do whatever it takes. This is the castle that has potentially got about a £40,000 price tag on for me, personally. This is the castle, and one or two others in the room. This is the castle that was built in front of the well site at Crawberry Hill in East Yorkshire in June of 2014. And the reason that was built is because Humberside Police had made it very clear that they were not going to facilitate any kind of peaceful protest. They were simply going to facilitate Rathlin Energy moving on to that well site. Well, we kept them off for 3 months, went to court. The court eviction order obviously went against us. Costs were awarded against us. They're still trying to pursue that. Good luck. Yeah. And on August the 12th of this year, Rathlin Energy announced that they would not be going to Crawberry Hill. So right now, they are actually in the process of closing down the well, abandoning the well, and then they will return this well site to its former agricultural glory, which you can see around it, by April of next year. And of course, you know, more locally, you've had the camp really here at Upton ever since the Barton Moss camp finished in April of 2014. But this is why the government has a problem with the anti-fracking community. Because one of the decisions that, fortunately, a few of us took back in early 2013, when there were just 4 anti-fracking groups in this country. 3 on the Fylde Peninsula and 1 in Sussex. And I had just come back from Australia, remember? And what I had seen in Australia was how ineffective a national organisation is in countering this industry. Because by definition, a national organisation almost has an existential attachment to the industry, because it needs the industry to be able to, you know, continue to get an income from donations, etc. And so in southern Queensland, where there's been nearly 18,000 wells drilled over a decade plus, about 12,000 of them are actually on the brink of production. Most of that's going to go to Asia. But a national organisation is real easy to infiltrate and to control. So back in early 2013, the 4 groups that were in existence at the time all agreed that the best way forward was, instead of looking to form a national organisation, was to try and nurture community groups in communities all around the country. And today we have over 450 community groups around the country. And the beauty of these community groups is that they cover the entire social and political spectrum. So there are people in these groups, you know, from the far right, from the far left, and everything in between. And they focus on the one thing that everyone agrees on. And that is that unconventional gas is not an industry that you want anywhere near your backyard or anybody else's backyard. And it's really important to keep that focus, because, as we've just said, you know, there's a wide range of political views within the anti-fracking community. And so, you know, the potential for division is not insignificant. But we have to be, you know, big enough to recognise that, you know, we're not going to agree on everything, and stay focused on what we do agree on. And this is what is causing the industry such a problem right now, because, you know, we have the groups, then we have people who don't want to be part of a group, but they work as individuals. You know, we've got academics, mostly retired, who are working with us. Because academics, we got any academics in the audience tonight? Right, that's fine then.
No.
No. If we have academics, unfortunately, academia is reliant on either industry or government funding. And so most universities are very reluctant to participate in research or put their heads above the parapet on issues that go counter to the industry or to the government. So consequently, the academics that tend to be supportive towards what it is we're trying to do here, which is simply raise awareness, tend to be retired academics. And of course, because they're retired, you know, they've got a wealth of experience, but they've also got time, they've also got access to resources.